I worked at that company for 7 years. 7 performance reviews. 7, we'll revisit this next quarter. And then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, in a meeting that was supposed to last 10 minutes, I found out the real reason I never got a raise. It had nothing to do with my performance. It had a name. And it wasn't mine. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter for this story, so I'll just call myself Dana. I started as a junior operations analyst at a mid-sized logistics company. I'll call it Bramwell Freight, back when I was 26. I was good at my job. Not flashy, not the loudest person in meetings, but reliable. The kind of employee managers say they couldn't run the department without. For 7 years, I heard that sentence a lot. We couldn't run this place without you, Dana. What I didn't hear, not once in 7 years, was a real raise. A cost of living bump here and there, sure. Enough to keep me from technically losing money to inflation. But never a real, meaningful increase. Every year I asked. Every year, my manager, I'll call him Greg, had the same answer. Budget's tight this year. Next year, for sure. I believed him. For 6 years, I believed him. Year 7 is when things started to crack. It started small. A new hire joined our team. I'll call her Priya, straight out of her MBA program. Sharp, likable, hardworking. Within 4 months, she was staffed on the same projects I'd been running solo for years. Within 6 months, she was in meetings I wasn't invited to anymore. I didn't think much of it at first. Companies grow. Teams change. I told myself that. Then, at the holiday party that year, someone, a little too many drinks in, mentioned, almost in passing, that Priya's starting salary was higher than my current salary. After 7 years. I didn't say anything that night. I went home, sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, and just did math in my head. Cost of living increases. Bonus percentages. What I'd asked for and been denied, year after year. And I realized, the new hire, 4 months in, was already making more than me. I told myself there could be an explanation. Maybe her degree. Maybe the market had shifted for that role. I wanted there to be an explanation, because the alternative was uglier. So I asked Greg directly. He said, I want to understand the pay bands for my role. Can we talk about where I sit compared to market rate? And Greg did what Greg always did. He smiled, said he'd look into it, and nothing happened for 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, I started paying attention differently. Not paranoid, just awake. I noticed things I'd been trained not to notice. I noticed that every stretch project that came with visibility to senior leadership went to Priya, or to 2 other newer hires, while I got the projects that kept the lights on but never got mentioned in the quarterly all hands. I noticed that Greg's calendar had a recurring meeting titled Talent Planning that had existed for over a year, and I had never once been invited, despite managing the largest account in the department. I started keeping a folder. Nothing dramatic, just screenshots of project assignments, emails where I'd asked for feedback and gotten vague non-answers, a spreadsheet I built myself tracking who got staffed on what and when. I told myself I was just being organized. Deep down, I think I already knew I was building a case, even before I admitted that to myself. 2 months later, it was performance review season again. My 8th review at the company. I walked in with actual numbers this time, not vague requests, but a printed page with our department's average raise percentage, the market rate data I'd pulled from 3 different salary databases, and a summary of the accounts I managed compared to the rest of the team. Greg looked at the page for maybe 4 seconds. Then he said the sentence that changed how I saw the whole company. Dana, I hear you, but com decisions above a certain level aren't really mine to make. That's more of a Rania conversation. I'd never heard that name before. Rania, it turned out, was a director 2 levels above Greg, someone I had never met, never emailed, never been in a room with in 7 years. Someone who, according to Greg, had final say over my compensation, despite the fact that she had, as far as I could tell, no idea I existed. That was the moment the story stopped being about a race. It became about finding out who was actually making decisions about my career, and why none of them had ever spoken to me directly. I requested a meeting with Rania. Not a hostile email, polite, professional, direct. I'd like 15 minutes to understand how compensation decisions are made for my role. It took 3 weeks and 2 follow-up emails before I got a slot on her calendar. 10 minutes, sandwiched between 2 other meetings. Barely enough time to say hello, let alone unpack 7 years of stagnant pay. But 10 minutes turned out to be exactly enough. I walked into that meeting with my folder. Not aggressive, not accusatory, just prepared. I laid out the market data. I laid out my tenure. I laid out the fact that a new hire with 4 months at the company was earning more than someone with 7 years and a track record of managing the department's largest account. Rania listened. She didn't interrupt. And then she said something I didn't expect. Can I be honest with you about something that has nothing to do with your performance? I said yes. She pulled up something on her laptop, turned the screen slightly so I could see part of it, and said, "Your role was flagged 2 years ago in a compensation audit. Do you know what that means?" I didn't. She explained. 2 years earlier, the company had run an internal pay equity audit, something HR does periodically, quietly, usually without employees ever knowing it happened. My role had been flagged as underpaid relative to market rate and relative to comparable roles in the department. Not by a small margin. By almost 18%. The audit had a recommendation attached to it: adjust my compensation to close the gap over the next 2 review cycles. That recommendation had been sitting in a file for 2 years. Untouched. Not because the company couldn't afford it, the department's budget had grown every single year I'd been asking for a raise. Not because my performance didn't justify it, my reviews were consistently rated exceeds expectations. It sat untouched because, as Rania put it, carefully, choosing her words, some managers deprioritize equity adjustments when they're not being tracked closely. It's not malicious, usually. It's just easier not to. I asked her directly, "Did Greg know about this audit?" Rania paused. Then she said, "Greg received the audit results the same time every manager did. He would have known your role was flagged. 7 years. 2 years of that specifically knowing, on paper, in writing, that I was owed a correction, and hearing, year after year, budget's tight, let's revisit next year." I want to be honest about how I felt in that moment, because I think it's the part most people skip in these stories. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sick. Genuinely sick, the way you feel when you replay a memory and suddenly see it completely differently than you did the first time. Every next year, I promise, from Greg. Every time I apologized for asking, made myself smaller, told myself I should be grateful just to have stable work. Every time I watched a newer hire get staffed on the project I'd built from scratch, and told myself it was probably nothing personal. None of that was a misunderstanding. It was a decision, renewed every single year, to let a documented, approved correction sit in a drawer because acting on it required effort nobody was forcing anyone to spend. Rania, to her credit, didn't try to minimize it once she saw my reaction. She said, "I want to fix this properly, not just quietly. Give me 2 weeks." I almost didn't believe her. 7 years of next year will do that to a person. But 2 weeks later, I got a calendar invite, this time not from Greg, but directly from HR and Rania's office together. In that meeting, they didn't just offer to close the 18% gap going forward. They calculated what I would have earned if the correction had been made when it was first flagged, 2 years earlier, and backpaid the difference in a lump sum. It wasn't 7 years' worth. HR was clear that backpay only applied from the point the audit had flagged the issue, not before. But it was real money, real acknowledgement, and, more importantly to me, it came with something else. Here's the part I didn't see coming. During that same meeting, Rania mentioned, almost as a side note, that my case wasn't an isolated one. Once she'd looked into how the 2-year-old audit had been handled, she found that 3 other employees under Greg's management had been flagged in that same audit, and none of the 3 had received their adjustments either. All 3 were people who, like me, had quietly kept doing excellent work while newer hires leapfrogged past them. All 3 had, at different points, asked Greg directly about pay and gotten some version of "let's revisit next year." What happened to Greg isn't something I'm going to dramatize, because I genuinely don't know all of it. Companies rarely tell you the details of another employee's outcome, even when that employee is your former manager. What I do know is that within 2 months, Greg was no longer managing our team. Whether that was tied specifically to how he'd handled the pay equity findings, or to a broader pattern that this incident helped surface, I can't say for certain. But the timing was hard to ignore. As for me, I got my adjustment, I got the back pay, and for the first time in 7 years, I sat in a room where someone with actual authority looked me in the eye and said, "This should have happened a long time ago, and I'm sorry it didn't." I want to end with the thing I keep coming back to, because I think it matters more than the money did. For 7 years, I assumed that if something was unfair, someone above me would eventually notice and fix it. I was wrong. The system had already noticed. There was a report, a flag, a recommendation, sitting in a file for 2 years. Noticing was never the problem. Acting on it was. If there's one thing I'd want anyone listening to take from this, it's this: the paper trail exists whether you ask for it or not. Pay equity audits happen quietly, all the time, at more companies than you think. The only thing that changed my situation wasn't luck. It was asking the specific, direct question that made it impossible for anyone to keep giving me a vague answer. Can we talk about where I sit compared to market rate? That sentence, ask to the right person, is what took 10 minutes to unravel 7 years. If this story resonated with you, I've got more like it: real patterns, real outcomes, no names changed except the ones that need to be. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one.